All right, then welcome to GDC 2016. I'm happy that I can open very early for all of us. And thank you for attending this session, despite the timing. I'm going to talk about how we experienced Hitman, a game I hope many of you have heard about, and the first season where we're currently in the middle of that. I would like to open with one short slide about myself, that you know who's talking, and I like defining myself actually more with my games than with anything else. I started rather early in 1987 on the Commodore 64. So yes, I've been making games for 29 years now. I was freelancer for 6 years. 13 years I was at a company called Neo Software, which became Rockstar Vienna. After that, I started Games That Matter, which became Deep Silver. I was there for 4 years. And now I'm, for 6.5 years, I'm with Square Enix. And I'm now a studio head at IR Interactive in Copenhagen. And we are known for many games like Mini Ninjas, Freedom Fighters, the Kane Lynch series, but most of all for Hitman. And that's what I want to talk about today. So the main points, I will try to keep it concise because it is a lot to take in. And I want you to get something out of this presentation. So I will give you a short overview of Hitman, what the brand is, what the game is, because that is the foundation, the baseline that we started with. And that's why that is relevant to understand. The majority of this talk today will be about what we call internally Hitman 2016, because it's the 6th game in the series, but it's the first game that we just called plain Hitman. And lacking a subtitle, we dubbed it 2016. And I will take you through our initial vision that we had for the project, what happened over the years, how we launched it, and now it's been running for a few months, and I will go to the ups and downs of that. I will have a core focus on takeaway points and lessons learned. I know that you cannot apply all of these to your personal situations. I hope you'll find some interesting and some very applicable, others perhaps not so. I also want to encourage you, if you have any questions after the presentation, please come to me. I will try to spend another 15 minutes or so after this is over if you want to have individual questions. So this is the main thing I want to give you, the key lessons. And then at the end, if there is some time left, then we'll have some Q&A publicly here, where I think we'll go through with a microphone as far as I know and do some public questions. All right, and let's get into it. And let me give you a short overview of Hitman. The game has been around as a franchise for 16 years now on the marketplace. And that was our starting point. It was after the 5th game, which was Hitman Absolution. We had shipped 5 up to that point in time in the 12 years. Hitman Absolution shipped 2012. And by that point in time, it was the best-selling Hitman game in the franchise. So we saw a good uptake over the years. It won 41 Best Game Awards and so on. But now enough self-promotion. Let's look at the interesting things that happened with Hitman Absolution. It was the first game where we had a major online component. And we tracked 11.3 million unique online players in a game that as a series was predominantly experienced as a single-player third-person stealth game. We had a multiplayer mode that is an asynchronous multiplayer mode. So may I ask, has anyone of you played Hitman Absolution in here? Okay, quite a few. Contracts mode? Okay, good. So Contracts mode was our asynchronous multiplayer mode where you created a hit on any NPC, more or less any NPC in the game. And then you could send that out to the community, or you could send it to a friend, you could challenge each other and become better. It was something that got inspired by what people already did with Blood Money and the older games on YouTube, where they created playthroughs and they shared videos and stuff like that. But the online mode was so successful that the amount of hours played in it, it made the single-player campaign pale in comparison completely. And that was very inspiring for us. 1.4 million users in total created these contracts, which is, I mean, I don't remember the hands exactly, but I think it's a good representation. People playing, but like 10% of them playing contracts and creating stuff as well. And 30 million contracts. These are the missions that users created were played up to today. And that is a huge number for us. And they were also ranked and so on. And the top contract, that means a player-created mission, was played 1.4 million times. And that was, actually, this is platform dependent because you cannot share them across platforms. So that was a big number. And interestingly enough, this number is from June 2016. We still have 300,000 unique monthly active players in a game that runs on Xbox 360 and PS3, and of course also on PC, and it shipped in November 2012. And in a game where we did nothing to sustain a proper community. So that was the starting point for us. The brand itself is also pretty well known. If you just Google the English word Hitman and look at the images, this is what like the first page is. So we kind of own the word Hitman. It's associated with Agent 47. And it also makes it, I'd say, a love brand. It's more than just a game series. You know, there are like 2 movies, there are novels, there are figurines, there are clothing lines, and all that kind of stuff. And some fans make it a big part of their personal life. And I'm telling you that because when you want to change something as fundamental as how people consume a game, how people might consume your game or your brand you're working on, you have to deal with that. You have very dedicated people that will have a very strong opinion on what you're creating. So we took the success that we had in the online service and what the community did with it, and that was the foundation for the vision. And now I want to explain to you why, after the game has been around for such a while and was actually pretty successful, why change anything at all? It's because times are changing as well. So in a very, very high bullet list, high-level bullet list, let's talk about Hitman 2016, what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to focus on the player freedom and the creative sandbox gameplay that made the series great. That's the bedrock of the series. That so far is nothing new. But we wanted to go into the current generation and make it like the biggest and most complex Hitman sandbox that we've ever built. So we had to ramp up our technology for that. But most of all, we wanted with the first game, build a foundation for a live and ever-expanding world that we called our world of assassination. A first game of more to come, a platform more or less where people can play with each other, share stuff, and continue playing over the years to come. Let me take you through some of the opportunities that you have and that we saw, and back then already were pretty convinced of, when you go into this live, episodic, AAA approach, where at the end of the day, we were the first ones to do it. Over the years we worked on it, we weren't sure about that, because I know others are also thinking and trying and moving in this direction. But at the end, we were the first ones, and that meant a lot of resistance, and it also meant a lot of successes. The opportunities we saw is, we started with this 2013, so after we launched Hitman Absolution and seeing how the online mode takes off. But over the years, already mid-development, we saw that the overall market started to transition into digital, also on consoles. I mean, PC is very digital, right? And PC sales are mostly online anyways nowadays, but also on the consoles. Let me show you from Activision. That is deliberately November 2014. It was the Q3 result, and they had 67% of their Q3 revenue. All of Activision Blizzard was digital. That included, of course, World of Warcraft and other games from Blizzard, but it also included all the other offline games they did. And mind, that was before Overwatch or Hearthstone. So that is really remarkable. And then we saw this overall market trend. This is either a market research institute that published that went from 2008 to 2014, just looking at the consoles. And this is the share of physical only, digital only, and digital and physical mixed within 90 days. And you can see that physical only is marginalized, and that digital only has been the majority already since 2012. Admittedly, if you look at releases, you have a lot of small games that come on Xbox Live Arcade and platforms like that. So the amount of titles is not totally representative, but the trend was undeniable already at that point in time. When you are online, when you are live, when you have a service running, you can be way more open and inclusive towards your fans. And that was very important to us, because we are not necessarily the most mainstream game out there. We are a game that is perceived as hard, as difficult, as a thinking man's game, and we wanted to be close to the fans and be able to react. Between Blood Money and Absolution, it took us 6 years to make a game, and that is a very long time to react to any feedback that you get. Also mind that your margin when you sell a game digitally is over 2 times bigger than when you sell a disc. And what that does to you is that you can tailor your game to your fans instead of actually looking for the lowest common denominator, because you do not have to sell the same amount of units to reach the same amount of profitability. And that gives you creative freedom. That was a key point for us. We wanted to go back to the formula of blood money that made the game great and successful, but it also made it difficult for some people to play. And in order to do that, digital was a great opportunity for us. And it also helps to make games that are a bit different than, many of the big AAA blockbuster games on disc. They have a tendency to kind of become alike, and we didn't want to be like that. And that's an opportunity you have with that. You can also innovate faster, as I said, faster than 6 years for sure. You can innovate within weeks, sometimes within days. You can balance something within days. You can add a feature perhaps within months. You can add content within a few months. You don't have to wait years for that. That is much more often, much better, that ultimately leads to better games. You can also, on the marketing side and on the community and social media side, see more coverage because you have events, you have content coming and so on. And if I may give a recent example, let's say Uncharted 4 was a huge hype, right? Fantastic game, huge hype. After the launch, people stopped talking about it. And that's because it is this kind of game that is a great weekend experience. It's linear, right? You don't replay it that often. If you have a live game, people are still talking about Destiny, or not to mention World of Warcraft and Overwatch and League of Legends and so on, right? These are some of them are very different to Hitman, but these are games that people engage with continuously. And that also gives you coverage. And I personally perhaps overestimated that, because we experienced most people buying the full pack, the full price, but it still opens the opportunity for more flexible pricing models. In our case, we had a so-called intro pack that we sold for $15, and that helps people to get on board without spending $60. Perhaps they can't even spend that much. Perhaps they don't want to spend that much because they just want to try it out and see whether that's a game for them. So that's an opportunity as well. And last, but absolutely not least, you are very close to your players, and your players are very close to you. Trust me, very close. You hear all of their opinions, all of their views, and that's a very positive thing in my opinion. I personally went into games to entertain people, if I may say so, to make people happy. And seeing people play our games is what also gives me job satisfaction. And when you're live and online, and when you have a game that evolves and changes over time, this is where you can be closer than ever before. And we had a huge distance when I began, like 30 years back. Distance was gigantic. And it became a bit smaller and smaller over the years, and now we're as close as I can imagine to be. And that is really great. In order to pull it off, though, you need to change a lot of minds. You need to make people come on board with you. And I want to take you through a short list of things that we had to do over the time, and I would like you to be mindful of as well. So first of all, your shareholders need to be on board with what you're doing there, because you have a completely new sales and development strategy. And that can be scary, so you need someone to back that vision and understand why you're doing it. You need your development team to be on board with you, because it's fine if a studio head or an executive producer or a lead programmer, they have the vision and believe in it. But everybody working on the game should have trust in what you're doing. And the uncertainty of facing something that unknown after having had a success formula, something you shouldn't underestimate. You need to take it seriously. It's also legit. It changes risk, right? So you need to take your dev team on board. You need to have your publisher on board, of course, right? Because many publishers, it's been changing, but when we started with that in 2013, there was not that much experience in selling a big amount of units at a high price digitally. That was the world of free-to-play and browser games and stuff like that back then, right? And that's also a big change of mind. Then you have your sales teams, the people that actually are in the territories trying to put boxes somewhere. Obviously and naturally, they're afraid of their jobs if they hear digital because they see their workers pushing discs. But you need them because you're still selling. You need to sell in the territories. You even need retail. I mean, we do things like ESD cards and then other opportunities that bring the game to people who don't see it online but still can buy it digitally. So sales is important, but you need to have these people support you as well. Then there are the first parties. So who is developing for consoles here? It's not many. No console developers here? All right. Okay, a few. So with first parties, obviously, you have a very close relationship because a console is an encapsulated environment. And you need to have them on board, and they have their policies. And at that time, most of the policies we needed didn't even exist. There wasn't a model for that for a full-price game. Now there's more and more, and I'm happy we were able to pioneer for ourselves, also for you and for other developers. But trust me, even after so many months and so many years working, there's always something new that comes up. Is, oh, okay, that's a new policy. We need to change something here, otherwise we can't do this or that or that or that. That is a continuous effort as well. You have distribution partners, so you might not sell everywhere yourself. You might not have publishing units in I don't know, Arabia or New Zealand or so. So you need to find partnerships with them because naturally they ask, where's our margin if we don't move boxes around? So you need to find incentives and business models how you can work with these partners to make that a success. And last but not least, you need to have the players on board, the people that consume your game. Because, let's be honest, especially at the time when we started, there were too many games out there that did something like early access or half-finished game, indie games that never got finished, and people paid money for that, right? So obviously there was this, hey, you're selling us an unfinished game if it's episodic. That is a very, very long way to get people to understand that. You always get some on board, you might get many on board, but it takes a long time to convince the majority of your players. And then, of course, you have our friends at the press that also want to talk about what you're doing there. And you know, press loves innovation. When you do something new, they're really supportive and eager, but they also need to find words to talk about it. And that's tricky, because we needed to find words how to talk about it. So often it was understood, but then how does it work again? What's the detail? And especially, what can I call it? What can I compare it to? And now people can compare it to Hitman, but it took a while to actually get there, and that's understandable. And if you do something new, and I assume you're also here not only thinking about copying exactly what we did, if you try to move something into this space, you need to think about that. So what we actually did in the first years before we went out, is we worked on top of our partners we worked with internally, we also had external partners and tools, and we established structures how we could actually run and develop a service. We did continuous market research with two main partners. One is the Big Solutions Group, which is a company that takes the journalistic angle on what you're doing. They do mock reviews, so they give you like Metacritic predictions and stuff like that. But most of all, they also help you to get feedback from different angles, like the consumer magazine, the technical magazine's point of view. That helped us to shape what we are doing and how we are doing it. And we worked with a company called EIDER, which is an analyst service. It's a real market research institute, statistically data-based. And they helped us to look at the trends of the digital market. Is there even enough digital market to justify the development and publishing budget of a game like Hitman? Because it's a different thing whether you ship 50 small games or one big game and hope that this one big game is actually able to recover and recoup your costs. All right. We did continuous user research. That's our internal team. We have a team in Montreal. We have a team in San Francisco. We have a team in Copenhagen. And that helps us to have a look at what players actually do. So we get players in, show them stuff, let them play the build, just ask them about that. That helped us as well because it's very close to the players. And we also established two steering groups. And one was the internal steering group. So looking at what happened in the game to decide what to do with development. And as of now, we meet daily, now that the platform is running. But in the beginning, it was like every few months, every month, and so on. And then we established a war room group, we call it, which is our international publishing and marketing teams, our partners. We meet weekly, and that does more or less the same on the sales and marketing side. And what we use there is we use what we call the hard facts and the soft facts. And we collect this data. And the hard facts is what people do in the game. You know, what features do they use, what levels do they play, how many hours do they clock in, stuff like that. The soft facts is what people tell you. What emails do they send you, but most of all, what do they tweet, what do they put on Facebook, what's in the Hitman forum, what's on Reddit, and that kind of stuff. And I tell you what people do and what people say, that's not necessarily always the same. So you need to be careful that when you collect this data, how you base your decisions, because you don't want to alienate 95 people based on the feedback of a vocal 1%, right? So that is what we're doing, and that's what we use to steer the project. All right. Now let's see how that went in reality, because now let's take you through how we executed that. And we'll give you a short overview of the timeline. So let's start from the announcement of the game in June 2015, and let's look up to almost today. Actually, tomorrow. So we announced the game at E3 2015, and there was a actually really successful announce for us. We had a lot of good reactions, but then a lot of questioning began. So we had event after event after event, where we explained what we did, we explained what we did, we explained what we did. We tried to find our language, how to talk about it, and to show people what we're doing. All the time in the background, we had a closed alpha with a bit over 1,000 hand-selected players that were already running the game, running the service, and playing with us. That was very important for us, also for a change of minds. Then we had a beta that started a few weeks before we launched the game, and it ran for a few weeks, and that was the final change in tweaking with the actual public. And then we didn't launch the game, we premiered the season. So this is when we started with it. And then we tried to keep a major extension of our World of Assassination every month. So we had Italian level, Marrakesh level, the most recent, our summer bonus episode. And actually tomorrow, we're going to launch Bangkok in Thailand. So that's the most recent extension. And while this season is running with the major content coming, we also had what we call a weekly pulse. So we have live features that are like events. We call them elusive targets, or we have so-called escalation contract and challenges. These are things that happen. And actually, I'm very proud of our development team. So far, we have really managed that we can extend the content of the game every single week. I think that's important because you want to keep people engaged. I'll get a little bit into more detail very soon. But now let's have a look at this early announcement phase, because that was interesting. First of all, when we announced the game, there was a lot of surprise. I was surprised that people were surprised that IO announces doing another Hitman game. I think wasn't the biggest surprise. But people were also surprised about what we did with the game. And we had headlines like, we're changing the way games are played. It's awesome. We might change games with Hitman. Square Enix will change everything. It's a fantastic assassination game. It's a great game. We completely get it. And we thought, fantastic. Score. What we are doing, everybody understands. Within less than 24 hours, this surprise changed into utter confusion. It was really surprising. Okay, this is Hitman, but wait, it's not on the disc? Yeah, but we told you it's not. Yeah, no, but really? Why? What? How? So then we had headlines like these. So that Interactive explains Hitman's confusing digital release plan. Hitman confusion hints at gamers' mistrust. That is the player part I mentioned before. Hitman demands publisher trust we don't have. And then we even coined a term that we internally used for a while, that was in the headline, called the Hitman situation. That was really interesting. We had also more confusion in the actual community. People were arguing back and forth about it already. They were saying, hey, I really want this to be good. I don't want it to be so great that others might do the same. That was something weird to take in. And then, of course, others think, why not? It's flexible. Isn't that a good thing to do? The whole design is terrible, because if it tanks at launch, we'll not get content anymore. Will rip us off. That was a fear that players had. I understand that when you come from an early access marketplace, for instance. Obviously, as a public company, you cannot promise one thing and then not deliver it. But players don't understand that. They don't understand the legal or financial background of a big publisher. And they don't have to, right? But that's something we had to deal with. And then, that was a key recurring theme here. Just the end is important. So I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to feel ripped off come launch day. Because obviously when you buy the whole game, the whole season, like a season pass, so to speak, you pay your $60, you get the game. But day one, the content is, of course, not everything. And that was a recurring theme. And I need to tell you, we did not find a perfect way to answer these concerns. We had to find the right voice for that. So we decided to go with something rather straightforward with the Q&A. We had a video blog done, and we thought about AMAs on Reddit, and we had all kinds of ideas, community events, and so on. But then we just decided, you know what, let's go for a Q&A, be straightforward with it. We were that for a long time. And that explained quite a bit to the players. But after that, we made what I think, looking back, was our biggest mistake. We became very concrete, and we launched an infographics, actually 2 of them. And these infographics were very specific. And although they explained ambition and direction, obviously it makes it very tangible. So that's something, going back, I would not do anymore. I think for us it was the wrong thing to do. We had to keep adding more details at Gamescom, or after Gamescom, which exactly a year ago we showed our first build to press. We got good feedback there. It's like, okay, this is Hitman coming home. This is the blood money you've been looking for. That's the Hitman game. So we actually really achieved these goals. But it stayed also in press and with the players is, yes, more content coming. But how much is it going to be? So let's look at the first 3 most important lessons we learned out of that. And let's see what you can take out of that for yourself. One is that being transparent can hurt you, and it can hurt you a lot. We made the decision that from an ivory tower developer that makes this game, and the publisher sells it, and we never talk to the fans, which we did for the better half of 15 years. It was a very, very long time we were closed, and we opened up. January 2014, actually, we opened up with a letter to the fans where we explained that. But when you are open, you sometimes expect people to understand too much. Because many of you, you know the details and the problems and daily struggles of development. Taking people through that is a hard thing to do. People don't trust the publisher. We're always the evil corporate company. No matter what you try to do, no matter how open you are, these things we also have to take into account. So what I would recommend to you, if you decide to change something on a franchise, on a game that people like and you have been working on for a long time, choose what fits your vision. Be open, be closed, show them everything, show them nothing, but take it through. I think our main mistake was being very open, getting scared by some of the reactions, then becoming overly corrective, and then going back and forth over too long a time. I would recommend to take it through, the light will come. And that helps you to actually keep your voice. Finding the right language, so how you talk about the change, is a huge challenge. I would recommend using existing terms wherever possible. We try to avoid things like episodic or MMO in the beginning. Episodic games were like telltale games, right? Very different from our game experience. We were not an MMO either. I mean, you're never really simultaneous multiplayer. We're not like Destiny, but somehow we are, you know. So we try to avoid these comparisons, but that was not good either. It's okay. We changed the voice to episodic. We explained what it is, why it is, how it works. And that was a huge change for us. It helped us to explain things better. I do understand that you might not find the perfect word for every single thing that you're innovating, but whenever you can, try to. And these things together also, when you look at other companies that are trying to do that, there's a reason why, for instance, Valve doesn't talk to anybody, right? They are not very public about what they do development-wise, or Niantic or Riot and so on. And I think this comes from these 2 things. It's hard to talk about some of the things you do, and most of all, being very transparent can be very painful. All right, and then third important point is a live game, in my humble opinion, must not be static. If you set out with a game that you want to have live, and it runs for 2-3 years in the future, and today you know what you're going to ship in 24 months, what features, what level, then don't go live. What's the point? You cannot react to player feedback, you cannot make the game better, you just have a production schedule that you then ship in a staggered release. But that also means when you talk about it, don't promise deliverables, promise ambition, and be as careful as possible not to make this like vague or interchangeable. People might perceive everything as a promise that you make. And work with partners that are also able to think that way. So looking back at the distribution partners, the first parties, your publishing teams, there is a certain ease, if I may say, to a static, huge release at a given point in time. Yeah, you might shift dates. There were always some problems with development and submission and manufacturing, but it's very different from something that's running and constantly changing and evolving. So finding partners that understand that is very important. All right, let's look at the next part, which is the time around our beta. It was the time when people actually started playing the game. The big change for us at that time, that we faced the clarity we gave and the skepticism we received. That was an effect of changing our tone. And don't mistake skepticism with confusion. So people were much clearer what we wanted, why we wanted it, and how we did it. And some were rightfully skeptic about it. But that's a good thing, because then people ask the right questions, you can think about it. They can make up their own decision, how they want to consume the game. And we started actually with a cover story on Edge, but then we also had the first playable for many people. And what we did is when we changed the way we talked about the game, and we changed also the release model in a way to completely episodic, because that was easier to talk about. There was writing the game also felt better that way. And as an effect, we had to cancel the pre-orders on one of the platforms. And that, of course, was also an important message to get out, because it was just another part of this how IO talks about Hitman. You know, people could pre-order it instantly afterwards again, right? And actually, most did, almost all did. But it was another trip in this. And then we got the headlines with, "Hey, it's fully episodic." It's clear Hitman ditches confusing release model entirely, now fully episodic. And a short quote from this article I want to draw your attention to is that this change, as an episodic game, translate the intent into a language gamers understand. And the editor appreciates how flexible the publisher has become in the face of the feedback. Both things are very important. So we found a way to talk about what we were doing, and we had our shareholder who trusted us and gave us the flexibility and was flexible enough themselves. And that headline up there, I really want everybody to take that home. I strongly believe in that. A build speaks more than 1,000 words. The moment people had hands-on, the perception was changed. The beta was the first consumer hands-on. Also press, when they got the preview build, the hand-on, that really helped us a lot. We got great previews, happy with that. Even the episodic model was understood. It was seen as the game that we focused on and so on. And also our online features, like the elusive targets and so on, were already understood. And community was very, very happy about that too. And that happened in a relatively short amount of time. And it was a change of tone and actually proving, of course. So the lessons I would like to give you there is that if your message is complicated, and unavoidably, sometimes your message might be complicated. Look at No Man's Sky, for instance. They had a long time to understand, for people to understand what they were doing, right? Games that innovate in what area, whatever, have complicated messages. But don't deliver too many of them at once. We actually made a very deliberate decision how we talked about changing the release model, canceling the pre-orders, and then how we actually going to ship it and what the features are. So think like in messaging, one headline at a time, because otherwise you convolute it, and that creates more confusion. Then, if I may say, if you're groundbreaking or trying to be groundbreaking in one area, then be conservative in others. Look at what are the bedrocks of what we have been doing successfully. For us, it was our open world sandbox gameplay. People really loved that. We were, I would say, surprisingly conservative about the core gameplay experience. We just brought it to the new generation of hardware and times. But choose what to innovate and what to keep steady. That will help you, in my opinion, because then you have at least a certain bedrock that you can count on. And if you do a beta, and more companies do that, make a beta a beta. I don't believe in betas that are just glorified demos, or less glorified demos. But a beta also shouldn't be too broken if you're trying to be a more mainstream product or have a bigger target audience. You cannot take people through a complete alpha and expect them to understand the game. But a beta can be a huge help for your development, obviously, but also for your marketing if you time it right. We did a lot with our beta, actually. And because of the digital release, we could afford a 5-week time span between beta, or the betas, and releasing, and still change a lot in the game. So we changed our opportunity system. That was actually one of the key things that gave us great scores in reviews. That was a new feature in the game. We changed our difficulty balancing, AI reactions. We also even changed the complete setup of the second tutorial mission to make it more sandboxy. And we fixed a lot of stuff, a lot of problems we had because the beta was actually very successful. It fixed a lot of problems in the server connection. And given how many problems we had at launch with the server connection, I would say I don't want to imagine what it would have been like without the beta. Yeah? So that is something I want to give you. If you can plan, if you have the luxury to plan, do a beta that can help you sell your game, but also gives you just about enough time to do the final, most important tweaks. All right. Let's have a quick look at the actual launch. Now it gets really interesting and hot. So we premiered the season, and we came in really, really well when people played that one level. It was the size that was recognized. It was the actual quality of the gameplay. But also at launch, there was a certain group, a certain percentage that found it too short, knowing there was more to come, knowing it was huge, but also knowing, hey, it's about the sixth of the game. And that affected us. So very top line, we were praised for the best of Blood Money and Absolution, hugely playable, non-linear sandbox, level design and gameplay quality. Nothing of this is new. Everything of these things we were praised for, the game had been praised for 15 years before. And we were criticized for the episodic release model, that it requires live connectivity, and we had on top of that launch server issues that we shouldn't have had. And that combination was something that we got criticized for a lot. I think also to a certain extent rightfully, but we had to make a tough decision. Do we want to avoid cheating? Or do we want to have an easy as possible single-player experience? And we chose to avoid cheating because our vision is a live service. Our vision is a platform for people to share and play with each other for years to come. Life is important for us, not cheating is important for us. When I look at some games like from the Division team, for instance, they are also fighting cheating. It's a difficult thing to choose. What do you prefer? Obviously, Hitman, having been a single-player game, was more criticized for being online than, let's say, an MMO or a first-person shooter. And the load times on some consoles, which was our problem, and we overlooked that. But because it was a live game, we were able to fix it in, I think, 2-3 weeks or something like that. So we were pretty fast with having the first fixes and made it better over the time of the service. So these are the highlights. But what it did is also polarized our community to an extent we hadn't seen before. Every game polarizes in a way, right? But for us, these two extreme ends were really, really big. We had extreme strong voices, pro and con. Interestingly, a lot of the negativity came from people who haven't played the game. And that's because people have strong opinions how things should be, right? I think that's okay to a certain extent, but we are in an industry where things are changing. If you look back at the 70s, we all come from arcades, and arcades are what, like microtransactions where you play a quarter to continue, and that's kind of where we come from, right? Things change, but some people think they shouldn't change. There was what I call the "I'll wait for the disc" meme. It was a recurring thing. So no matter how good the review was, no matter what assets we put out and what people liked about trailers and stuff like that, there was always, scroll down, 10, 20 comments down, you'll find the first, hey, I'll wait for the disc. Cool, I'll wait for the disc. I don't like the model, I'll wait for the disc. And that clashed with feedback and articles of people that, hey, that's perfect. Hitman is the right game to do that. I really have the time to play that level before I go to the next and the next. That was an active player. So what we actually had, what we saw is, we're really happy with the start of the review scores, And we had very, very bad user Metacritic points. This is actually from like last week at launch. That looked way worse. Yeah. So and then we still have a bad, comparably bad user Metacritic. That also led to an article on the Dutch Inquisition that was called "Hitman got meta bombed." And I would actually, if you find the time and have the interest, encourage you Google it, try to find it, and read through that, because there are some good points in there. And that went at the same time out, like these things, where people are writing articles about why you should buy it, why it is good, why it is right. So now, let's have a quick look at what happens when you're out, because now you're the showrunner I have in the title. Showrunner is a term from television, which seemingly became popular when episodic and fragmented content became more and more popular, and is running quite a lot now, just so you know that. But when you're running a season, you have submission after submission after submission, and that follows. You're heavily dependent on your whole infrastructure, on the third parties, on the internet service providers, on the cloud service providers. So we work with Microsoft Azure, for instance, and obviously we need all these systems to run. They do compute for us, and they run part of the games. You need first-party authentication. You release globally, right? You have partners everywhere, and it can happen so easily that one of the partners forgets to switch 1 hour, like too early, too late, whatever, that happens. And you always have the pitchforks in front of your doors because it's your game, right? And a little bit to me, it felt like running a television network in the 70s. There was always something that stopped something. There was always something out of our controls. And it felt, I can't get it right. So that is something when you go live, I guess many of you have live experience, but also when you go live with something that is bigger and you want to be close to the fans, you will have to work with. Key lesson from that part is that if you change something as fundamental as a release model, could be also something else, but it will affect your score negatively. So I recommend that you focus on the roots of your franchise in your game series. Don't neglect what made your franchise great, because that will help you to counterbalance it. Everything that happens is your fault. It's no matter where the issue lies, right? And I think that's okay, because you are the face. You're close to the fans now. Where else should they go? They have a problem with their modem. Of course they think, the connectivity is fucked up again. So tightly integrate your community team into the development team. Don't make them separate. I think that is a really, really good thing to do. It's not someone else's problem, it's your problem. You're running a live game. When you develop, avoid what I call death march style crunch. So wearing out your team completely. And don't do that, because it becomes mission critical that you can sustain a certain pace throughout the whole season. And it's unrealistic to think that nobody ever has to work a weekend. But aim for it. Something goes wrong anyways. You cannot plan for wearing. You need to actually work with your release schedule accordingly, that you don't wear people out. And don't create a separate live team. It's like, okay, this is the punch team or the ship, and then there's the live team. I have not seen this really succeed yet. I heard some stories, but myself, I haven't seen it yet. And most people that run successful bigger services see this one team. Everyone is in the live team, because you're running a live game. So everybody's in the game team. And they also avoid the second-class citizenship, right? That some people feel like, they're just in the live team. All right. As the last part, let's have a look how it has been going over the season. And I think that's insofar interesting because we had this ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. And when the season is running, we saw that the appreciation for what we were doing, what our vision was and what the game is, has actually increased. There was what I'd call a mid-season sentiment change that happened about 1 to 2 months back. It was also our second drop that helped to explain what we're doing. The level was received very, very well. But it also brought people in to continue playing and seeing how it is fun to play for a long amount of time. And this was a funny article that actually still talked about what we had to prove. We have to prove something with the episodic release. And judging by the amount of people saying they will wait and see how it goes, or just pick up the disc version sometime in 2031, it definitely does. Yeah, we continuously have to prove something. It's also a good thing, because you need to prove we're a service worth being in. So we had very good headlines on it, and that was a sentiment that also came up. This is the third episode we released. 3 episodes in, I'm now confident that Hitman is a blood money success I wanted. Also something community starts to say. And let me emphasize that I'm convinced the quality of Sapienza, which was our second level, would not have been possible to that level without being a live game, without people playing the game, and without us looking at what they do and what they say. We really used that to make that better, and that worked very, very well for us. Now let's go to charted territory, a few charts. And I'm sorry I cannot show you the absolute numbers because we're a public company, and that information is unfortunately not public, but I can show you relative numbers. So on this chart, what you see is the red line is who enters the game as a new player each day and the total amount. And this spike at the very beginning is months, so from June 2015 to March 11th, it's all the pre-orders that accumulated and got executed, right? So this is your day one spike. But the curve, let's zoom into this area here, and let's look at that. And that is interesting because it is very different to at least anything I have ever seen when you have a AAA game release. Because normally when you release a game, you have your day one spike, your week one spike, perhaps a second week spike, and depending on your window, perhaps a Christmas spike, but it becomes completely flat afterwards. We get new players every day. It's extremely steady, which is surprising. This is months of more or less unchanged sales and new player behavior. That is without any discount. So it's not that we did anything with the price drops and so on. And that is very different. If that goes on for a long time, that's going to be great for us. Right now, at the beginning, it was okay. The start was not bad, could have been better. But after 2 weeks, it's just like, okay, it's not really dropping off that bad. It's just not. We become pretty steady. We are running really well, and 64% of these people still buy, actually an increasing number, buy the $60 package, because now they don't have to wait for the content to come, I assume. So we had, when we look at the daily active players, a big impact with the monthly beats, so when we added levels to the game. And you see that here pretty well. So when we launched the game and then Sapienza, Marrakesh, the bonus episodes, there is, of course, a summer hole. We, of course, like all of us, I guess, felt the soccer European Championship and stuff. But what's interesting is that we also acquired a lot of new players when we launched our main hardcore online feature, the elusive targets, which is actually played by a smaller percentage than the other less hardcore features that are online. But I was very successful in driving the game forward and created spikes whenever we released that. On top of that, we had these weekly pulses, or we have them still. Every week we have content that comes. The escalation contracts, featured contracts, and so on, and elusive targets. And elusive targets is a hardcore feature where you have a mission. This mission is there for like 2 to 4 days, and you can only play it once. You kill the target, you're done. That's how you did it. It escapes, it's over, and if you don't play it in a time window, the target is gone as well. It will never come back. So that is something that is very successful in the core audience. And the red ones are the times when we had elusive targets. So we played around with frequency, looking what that does, and they changed the activity remarkably. They bring people back, and actually this big chunk here brought a lot of people back, and there was killing Gary Busey, and obviously it seems to be everybody likes to kill Gary Busey. We thought it's just a marketing stunt, but it was actually very much liked by the community. And then a short overview on the actual player activity and what players play. I found it interesting to see that as long as there was only one piece of content, that's a tutorial, available, people played that. And then when the next one came out, they played it, the new one, that's the green one, but they kept playing the other as well. And that went on and on and on, up to the level where we have now 6 missions out, and people almost play them at equal amounts. Because of the new features, because of the live activities, and so on. So this is when it really started to work for us. It was the episodic success, it was the elusive targets that people liked. We are now in lists of, and that was a huge sea change for us. Hey, this could be game of the year, elusive targets are great and stuff like that. And even community started to really like it. An observation I want to give you in the final minutes of this is when you look at episodic games, and let me here take Life is Strange, but please take the time to look at other episodic games as well. Take the time to look at television shows. All of them follow, or all of them is too much, but many of them follow this pattern. When Life is Strange was launched, the Metacritic, which I think an interesting indicator, was 75. When the episodes changed, 78, 81, 81, 81. And then they shipped the whole season at once, which is exactly all of that. And that scored 85. And that is because people start understanding the whole thing, how it connects, what it does, how it clicks. It's like television shows. People appreciated Twin Peaks afterwards, right? And that's fine, but that's something that you need to take into account if you do episodic games. We are in a way on a similar trajectory, but obviously we can still fuck it up. We can still make mistakes. Every single release we do needs to be good because people can get out at any time. And people that bought episodically can get out by just not paying us more money. And you know what? I like that because it makes us, as a developer, responsible to deliver quality to the people who like playing the game. Let's go through the lessons. So episodic games tend to score higher once they're fully understood. And what that means is be mindful with your pricing policy. We try to keep our price point as steady as we can, even if it doesn't deliver the sought-after sales spikes. But it helps you to sell while your quality is increasing, or the perception of your quality is increasing. Talking about improvements and new features is better after the fact because it reduces cynicism and makes things clear. For us concretely, that means we don't promise features anymore. What we do is we use our release notes to talk to players and to press. And that makes us very genuine because we can talk about the things we've actually delivered. And our ambition is to deliver the things that people are really asking for first. So that works really well. And on the charts I showed you before, there are two key things. Is content extensions helped us to bring players back that might have stopped playing. And the weekly events kept players playing that stayed in it. I think that was really interesting. You see people come back every week, and then there are some people that just come back when there's new content coming. So the combination of that is useful, and it doesn't have to be as big as a Hitman level. I know that's huge content, but you can do it with other things as well. So plan for activities in your game and for regular additions. All right, a few concluding recommendations. There was an impact on the development team that this being a developer conference, I think might be interesting to hear. We started when we developed the game with what we internally called the first life, which was our first playable, more or less, that we published to all of Square Enix. And Square Enix being like 3,000 people, we had a good base and quite a few signed up, and we had people playing that. And that was a huge change because we had to overcome this fear of showing our dirty underwear, the first things we've done with this new game, to the people we appreciate most, our colleagues that are also developers and also make awesome games. And although we are friends, we also compete a little bit with each other, right? That was a very important step for us to learn what it means to be live. And then we started updating this build. And we practiced customer relations management, right? We ran the servers for the first time. We applied updates to the game while that was being played, which we ultimately updated to the vertical slice, which, as you might know, is the part where you prove your final quality and gameplay in a small part of the game. And we got into this monthly release mindset and backwards compatibility, with player profiles, save games, and stuff like that. That we then upgraded to the closed alpha. That was the same build, which became, based on the same build, which became the first touch point with the real consumers. That was when actual players played it, what I mentioned before in the time overview. And that had an effect. It put the game first. And that means that if you're someone who's only in it for technology, and I come from a programming background. I've been a programmer half of my career. And actually, I'm happy to see some of our programmers here as well. So they went through that as well. The technology focus has to come second. It has to serve the game. And you need to love the game also when you love doing technology first. Your deployment and runtime stability becomes highly important, right? The technical QA becomes even more important because you cannot afford 3 weeks without a working build. You also need to advance your engine. We had to do that because we needed to introduce more flexibility for doing that, for live updating content and stuff, and more deterministic deployments and so on. And we distributed our builds differently to especially the people that played it. All our builds came via Steam and the platforms, more or less, which helps that people just log in and they get a new build, and that helped us to practice that stuff. All right. So, to conclude, from my point of view, the digital distribution change has fully reached the console market. If you took the time to read the news in the last 2-3 weeks, look at Activision's this year's numbers. It's amazing how much goes digitally in the mainstream AAA console market. So think about how your brand can utilize these opportunities, right? It's not every game can. You need to have something where it fits, but just think about it. Perhaps it doesn't work, perhaps it does work. The transition, and that's why you should start thinking, will take a long time. You need to take a lot of people and stakeholders on board with it. That is something that needs to go through the entire organization. And be mindful that whether it's live or episodic, it's not a concept that will work on absolutely every type of game. It worked in Hitman because the nature of the fantasy is you get a mission, you travel somewhere, it can be time limited, it can come at any point in time. It's a non-linear game experience. There are games where I would not apply that. But think about it, perhaps it works. Just don't force it, right? And I think, last not least, that if you expose yourself to the players with all these things, with being open, being inclusive, listening, looking, and also taking the blame, then ultimately you make better games. I'm convinced it's going to be the best Hitman game that we've ever done because of that. And in my opinion, that alone makes it worth doing. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. And now we have a little bit of time left for questions and answers. Any questions? Microphone's coming.
Oh. Hi. Thanks. Very, very great presentation. Could you iterate on the war room you talked about before, the marketing war room?
Yeah.
Because I find it's an interesting transition that the big games are turning more into like the commercial world, more of the online marketing. You mentioned CRM yourself as well. You're using the analytics and the tools in the right way, and how do you like monitor the brand and so forth, right?
So the way we are structured is that we have an own brand marketing department at each studio, and their job is to collect all the data from the brand perspective. And the development team looks at the development perspective, things like connectivity, player behavior, and so on. We use Azure to collect the data, and we use a system called Tableau, which you might have heard about, to analyze the data and visualize it. And I need to say there that actually, even with the hard facts, and I talked to a few others as well, I think it's not only us doing it like that. You can look at data, but it is a bit of an art form as well. It's not only science, an art form to actually make your decisions on data as well. But it helps you. It helped us, for instance, to see things like where do people play a lot? So what level areas are visited? Which areas are unvisited practically in the main mission? And that's a really cool area. And it's perfect to place an elusive target there, or to do a contract there, or some live features and so on. And that helps us to make better use of what we have created and enhance the player fun at the same time. The same is true for difficulty or for items they use or disguises or that kind of things. And that's more the steering of the project. In the war room, we meet with all the territories, which is it's like a conference call with the global territories, and everybody has some local requirements, right? Germany is a different market than France, UK, US, or so on. And then we try to square that circle and say, okay, this is the direction we take it, this is the advantage for this or that market. There can be things like pricing, but there are also things like, how do we talk about it? some of the live things. In Germany, people got that comparably easily. Other markets, they were more confused by it. And then there are markets that still have a problem with being live and online because they pay for traffic, or they live in a country where it's only the coastlines or the major cities that have any internet connection at all. That's worth mentioning. So that's what the war room does for us. It's driving the commercial success or sustainability. The question was, what about Brand Monitor? We work with a company called Brand Watch, which is like giving us statistical data how positive, negative people are about us and the game, and that helps us to see how we train with the things we talk. That's also when we can verify one headline at a time, and we know, hey, the game is we're canceling pre-orders. You cannot expect a lot of positivity about that, right? So you know what you get, and then you can verify whether these things are actually working. I think we don't have much time left. 2 more questions, is that possible? There's 2 more questions? Okay, let's see. Yes? Shout out, I repeat.
A lot of AAA games, despite having betas, still seem to have a lot of issues with their servers on launch. Why do you think that is?
So the question is, why do many AAA games, despite having betas, still have troubles with the servers at launch? My honest answer is, I really can't tell 100%. I think that when you try to push boundaries, if you do games that are not the same and the same, then you are always trying to push the edge, and you do very complex stuff. And that complexity sometimes only completely manifests itself when it's out in the consumer market. I also do think in our concrete case that despite really many people playing the beta, I do think they were more tolerant towards these problems, and they were reported a bit less. And our tracking at the time was less sophisticated than it was over the course of the season. I think that's true for others as well, even for companies that have a lot of experience with running live games already. For us, that was the first time in that magnitude. But even companies that ship more than one of these games have these problems. So I think it's a combination of the complexities that just come from a vastly spread out network, because you can connect in so many different ways, from LTE to glass fiber to dial-ups and so on, right? And you can be all over the world. And sometimes even if you use distributed systems, you underestimate it. And I think that is one of the reasons. And it also depends on the type of game, how you even use online connectivity, right? Because an MMO is different than Hitman or an FPS. Okay, last question, and I will stay here or actually outside for more questions. So can I talk more about the publisher reaction when we proposed and when we released? That is, of course, a very subjective thing, because I only have the experience with one title, and I work for Square Enix. Square Enix was extremely supportive. The vision was completely understood. We have a bit of this dogma of, it's like our company motto to make players happy with unforgettable experiences. Being live and close is actually very close to that vision, because we want to be close to the people to deliver the experiences. And there is a long-term future in that for us, because as publishers, it's our players that matter. It's the people that spend time in our games. I'm happy to see people clocking 200, 300 hours in our game already, and it's not even half out, right? That is something where I see a lot of potential also in the future. And the reaction from the publisher was, yes, that's what we want to do. Mind that we are also the home of Final Fantasy and MMOs and so on, so we know how to engage with players, and that was really positive. When we released, it's, I think the same feeling I had, we had on a group level as well. It was like, the start. Yeah, when we do this, we can sell more. Of course we can sell more, because we sell all of that more or less day one, and then it's on the shelf for a few months before you hope that they don't return, or you argue or do down pricing and stuff like that, right? Digital means every single sale is in the hand of a consumer instantly. That was a big difference, and also a learning experience for all of us. So I think I'm really happy at being at a company that is able to allow that freedom, willing to take risks, and able to use these opportunities without panicking or going back and forth too fast. Because as we see, it's the long game that matters. The digital market is something that needs to run long, and it keeps players playing and it keeps players buying. Very different to the experience I have with selling discs. All right, thank you very much. If you have more questions, 15 more minutes or so, I think there's space outside the room. All right, thank you.